Report 375,375, Chapter 18 Simon Commission and the Nehru Report appointment of the Indian Statutory Commission the Government of India Act, 1919, had a provision that a commission would be appointed 10 years from date to study the progress of the governance scheme and suggest new steps. An all-white, 7-member Indian Statutory Commission, popularly known as the Simon Commission, after the name of its chairman, Sir John Simon, was set up by the British government under Stanley Baldwin's prime ministership on November 8, 1927. The members were formed from 4 conservatives, 2 Labourites, and 1 Liberal. The commission was actually under the joint chairmanship of Sir John Simon and Clement Attlee, who was to be Britain's prime minister in the future. The commission was to recommend to the British government whether India was ready for further constitutional reforms and along what lines. Although constitutional reforms were due only in 1929, the Conservative government, then in power in Britain, feared defeat by the Labour Party, and thus did not want to leave the question of the future of Britain's most prized colony in irresponsible Labour hands. Also by the mid-1920s, the failure of the 1919 Act to create a stable imperial power. 376. A brief history of modern India had led to several parliamentary reports and inquiries. The Lee Commission was appointed in 1923 to look into the organization and general conditions of service, as well as the methods of recruitment for Europeans and Indians in the civil services. Being concerned only with the superior civil services, it came to be known as the Royal Commission on the Superior Civil Services in India. The commission suggested that the Statutory Public Service Commission, as put forward by the Government of India Act 1919, needed to be established without delay. The Muddaman Committee, officially known as the Report of the Reforms Enquiry Committee, was set up in 1924, mainly to look into the working of the Constitution as set up in 1921 under the Act of 1919. Its report was not unanimous. While the majority suggested some minor changes in the structure of the Constitution, the minority, consisting of non-official Indians, strongly criticized the system of monarchy and wanted it to be abolished immediately, and the Constitution made democratic. In 1926, the Linlithgow Commission, officially the Royal Commission of Agriculture, was set up to examine and report the condition of India's agricultural and rural economy. The Commission submitted its report in 1928 and made comprehensive recommendations for the improvement of the agrarian economy as the foundation for the welfare and prosperity of India's rural population. Among other things, the Commission recommended that the quality of Indian cattle should be improved, and that this should be done by importing foreign bulls of better quality and using them to breed with Indian cows. The Conservative Secretary of State for India, Lord Birkenhead, who had constantly talked of the inability of Indians to formulate a concrete scheme of constitutional reforms, which had the support of wide sections of Indian political opinion, was responsible for the appointment of the Simon Commission. Indian response to the Simon Commission was immediate and nearly unanimous. What angered the Indians most was the exclusion of Indians from the Commission and the basic notion behind the exclusion that foreigners would discuss and decide upon India's fitness for self-government. This notion, Simon Commission and the Nehru Report 377, was seen as a violation of the principle of self-determination and as a deliberate insult to the self-respect of Indians. Congress response the Congress session in Madras, December 1927, meeting under the presidency of M.A. Ansari, decided to boycott the commission at every stage and in every form. Meanwhile, Nehru succeeded in getting a snap resolution passed at this session, declaring complete independence as the goal of the Congress. Other groups, those who decided to support the Congress call of boycott, the Simon Commission, included the liberals of the Hindu Mahasabha and the majority faction of the Muslim League under Jinnah. The Muslim League had 2 sessions in 1927, one under Jinnah at Calcutta, where it was decided to oppose the Simon Commission, and another at Lahore under Muhammad Shafi, who supported the government. Some others, such as the Unionists in Punjab and the Justice Party in the South, decided not to boycott the commission. Public response: the commission landed in Bombay on February 3, 1928. On that day, a countrywide hardle was organized and mass rallies held. Wherever the commission went, there were black flag demonstrations, hardles, and slogans of "Simon, go back." As to who coined the catchy slogan, it is widely believed the Indian freedom fighter and member of Congress Socialist Party and Mayor of Bombay, Yusuf Meherli, did so. Some also believe it was Lala Lajpat Rai who came up with the slogan. A significant feature of this upsurge was that a new generation of youth got their first taste of political action. They played the most active part in the protest, giving it militant flavor. The youth leagues and conferences got a real fillip. Nehru and Subhas Bose emerged as leaders of this new wave of youth and students. Both traveled extensively, addressed and presided over conferences. This upsurge among the youth also provided a fertile ground for the germination and spread of new radical ideas. 378. A brief history of modern India socialism, reflected in the emergence of groups such as Punjab Naujawan Bharat Sabha, workers' and peasants' parties, and Hindustani Sua Dal, Karnataka. Police repression: the police came down heavily on demonstrators, their charges not sparing even the senior leaders. Jawaharlal Dr. Ambedkar and the Simon Commission. Dr. Ambedkar was appointed by the Bombay Legislative Council to work with the Simon Commission. In October 1928, Ambedkar went before the commission. He argued for universal adult franchise, for both male and female alike, for provincial autonomy in the provinces and Dairakiyat center. Significantly, universal adult franchise was at the time yet to be guaranteed in most of European countries. On behalf of the Bahishkrita Hidakarini Sabha, he submitted a memorandum on the rights and safeguards he felt were required for the depressed classes. Ambedkar said that there was no link between the depressed classes and the Hindu community, and stated that the depressed classes should be regarded as a distinct and independent minority. He asserted that the depressed classes as a minority needed far greater political protection than any other minority in British India because of its educational backwardness, its economically poor condition, its social enslavement, and for the reason that it suffered from certain grave political disabilities from which no other community suffered. In the circumstances, Dr. Ambedkar demanded, for the political protection of the depressed classes, representation on the same bases as the Mohammedan minority. He wanted reserved seats for the depressed classes if universal adult franchise was granted. In case universal franchise was not granted, Ambedkar said he would campaign for a separate electorate for the depressed classes. He also expressed the need to have certain safeguards either in the Constitution, if it was possible, or else, in the way of advising the instrument to the governor regarding the education of the depressed classes and their entry into the public services. The report of the Simon Commission did grant reserved seats to the depressed classes, but the condition was that candidates who would take part in the elections would have, first of all, to get their competence endorsed by the governor of the province. Ambedkar was most displeased with this, but in any case, this report remained a dead letter. Simon Commission and the Nehru Report. 379 Nehru and G.B. Pant were beaten up in Lucknow. Lala Lajpat Rai received severe blows on his chest in October 1928, which proved fatal, and he died on November 17, 1928. View the blows, which fell on me today, are the last nails driven into the coffin of British imperialism. Lala Lajpat Rai. Impact of appointment of Simon Commission on the national movement. The impact of the appointment of the Simon Commission in Indian politics was twofold. It gave a stimulus to radical forces demanding not just complete independence, but major socio-economic reforms on socialist lines. When the Simon Commission was announced, the Congress, which did not have any active program in hand, got an issue on which it could once again forge mass action. Roman II. The challenge of Lord Birkenhead to Indian politicians to produce an agreed constitution was accepted by various political sections, and thus prospects for Indian unity seemed bright. Simon Commission recommendations. The Simon Commission published a 2-volume report in May 1930. It proposed the abolition of diarchy and the establishment of representative government in the provinces which should be given autonomy. It said that the governor should have discretionary power in relation to internal security and administrative powers to protect the different communities. The number of members of provincial legislative council should be increased. The report rejected parliamentary responsibility at the center. The Governor-General was to have complete power to appoint the members of the cabinet, and the Government of India would have complete control over the High Court. 380. A brief history of modern India. It also recommended that separate communal electorates retained and extended such electorates to other communities, but only until tensions between Hindus and Muslims had died down. There was to be no universal franchise. It accepted the idea of federalism, but not in the near future. It suggested that a consultative council of Greater India should be established, which should include representatives of both the British provinces as well as princely states. It suggested that the Northwest Frontier Province and Baluchistan should get local legislatures, and both NWFP and Baluchistan should have the right to be represented at the center. It recommended that Sindh should be separated from Bombay, and Burma should be separated from India because it was not a natural part of the Indian subcontinent. It also suggested that the Indian army should be Indianized, though British forces must be retained. India got fully equipped, but by the time the report came out, it was no longer relevant because several events overtook the importance of its recommendations. Nehru Report has an answer to Lord Birkenhead's challenge. An all-parties conference met in February 1928 and appointed a subcommittee under the chairmanship of Motilal Nehru to draft a constitution. This was the first major attempt by the Indians to draft a constitutional framework for the country. The committee included Tej Bahadur Sapru, Subhas Chandra Bose, M.S. Ainey, Mangal Singh, Ali Imam, Shuaib Qureshi, and G.R. Pradhan as its members. The report was finalized by August 1928. The recommendations of the Nehru Committee were unanimous except in one respect. While the majority favored dominion status as the basis of the Constitution, a section of it wanted complete independence as the basis, with the majority section giving the latter section liberty of action. Simon Commission and the Nehru Report. 381 main recommendations. The Nehru Report confined itself to British India, as it envisaged the future link-up of British India with the princely states on a federal basis. For the Dominion, it recommended Dominion status on lines of self-governing dominions, the form of government desired by Indians, much to the chagrin of younger, militant section, Nehru being prominent among them. Roman II. Rejection of separate electorates, which had been the basis of constitutional reforms so far. Instead, a demand for joint electorates with reservation of seats for Muslims at the center, and in provinces where they were in minority, and not in those where Muslims were in majority, such as Punjab and Bengal, in proportion to the Muslim population there with right to contest additional seats. Roman III. Linguistic provinces. Roman IV. 19 fundamental rights including equal rights for women, right to form unions, and universal adult suffrage. V. Responsible government at the center and in provinces. A. The Indian Parliament at the center to consist of a 500-member House of Representatives elected on the basis of adult suffrage, a 200-member Senate to be elected by provincial councils, the House of Representatives to have 8 years of 5 years, and the Senate, one of 7 years. The central government to be headed by a Governor-General, appointed by the British government but paid out of Indian revenues, who would act on the advice of the Central Executive Council responsible to the Parliament. B. Provincial councils to have a 5-year tenure, headed by a governor acting on the advice of the Provincial Executive Council. Roman VI. Full protection to cultural and religious interests of Muslims. Roman VII. Complete dissociation of state from religion. The Muslim and Hindu communal responses. Though the process of drafting a constitutional framework was begun enthusiastically and unitedly by political leaders, communal differences crept in, and the Nehru Report got. 382. A brief history of modern India involved in controversies over the issue of communal representation. Delhi proposals of Muslim League. Earlier, in December 1927, a large number of Muslim leadership met at Delhi at the Muslim League session and evolved for proposals for their demands to be incorporated into the draft constitution. These proposals, which were accepted by the Madras session of the Congress, December 1927, came to be known as the Delhi Proposals. These were Black Circle joint electorates in place of separate electorates with reserved seats for Muslims, Black Circle 1/3 representation to Muslims in Central Legislative Assembly, Black Circle representation to Muslims in Punjab and Bengal in proportion to their population, Black Circle formation of 3 new Muslim majority provinces, Sindh, Baluchistan, and Northwest Frontier Province. Hindu Mahasabha demands. The Hindu Mahasabha was vehemently opposed to the proposals for creating new Muslim majority provinces and reservation of seats for Muslims majorities in Punjab and Bengal, which would ensure Muslim control over legislatures in both. It also demanded a strictly unitary structure. This attitude of Hindu Mahasabha complicated matters. Compromises in the course of the deliberations of the all-parties conference, the Muslim League dissociated itself and stuck to its demand for reservation of seats for Muslims, especially in the central legislature and in Muslim-majority provinces. Thus, Motilal Nehru and other leaders drafting the report found themselves in a dilemma. If the demands of the Muslim communal opinion were accepted, the Hindu communalists would withdraw their support. If the latter were satisfied, the Muslim leaders would get estranged. The concessions made in the Nehru Report to Hindu communalists included the following. Joint electorates proposed everywhere but reservation for Muslims only where in minority. Black Circle Sindh to be detached from Bombay only after. Simon Commission and the Nehru Report 383 Dominion status was granted and subject to weightage Gavento Hindu minority in Sindh. Black Circle political structure proposed broadly unitary. As residual powers rested with the center. Amendments proposed by Jinnah at the All-Parties Conference held at Calcutta in December 1928 to consider the Nehru Report. Jinnah, on behalf of the Muslim League, proposed 3 amendments to the report. I. 1/3 representation to Muslims in the central legislature. Roman 2. Reservation to Muslims in Bengal and Punjab legislatures proportionate to their population, till adult suffrage was established. And Roman 3. Residual powers to provinces. These demands were not accommodated. Jinnah's 14 points. Jinnah went back to the Shafi faction of the Muslim League in March 1929, gave 14 points which were to become a basis of all future propaganda of the Muslim League. The 14 points were as follows. 1. Federal constitution with residual powers to provinces. 2. Provincial autonomy. 3. No constitutional amendment by the center without the concurrence of the states constituting the Indian Federation. 4. All legislatures and elected bodies to have adequate representation of Muslims in every province without reducing a majority of Muslims in a province to a minority or equality. 5. Adequate representation to Muslims in the service and in self-governing bodies. 6. 1/3 Muslim representation in the central legislature. 7. In any cabinet at the center or in the provinces, 1/3 to be Muslims. 8. Separate electorates. 9. No bill or resolution in any legislature to be passed if 3/4 of a minority community consider such a bill or resolution to be against their interests. 10. Any territorial redistribution not to affect the Muslim majority in Punjab, Bengal, and NWFP. 384. A brief history of modern India. 11. Separation of Sindh from Bombay. 12. Constitutional reforms in the NWFP and Baluchistan. 13. Full religious freedom to all communities. 14. Protection of Muslim rights in religion, culture, education, and language. Nehru Report found unsatisfactory. Not only were the Muslim League, the Hindu Mahasabha, and the Sikh communalists unhappy about the Nehru Report, but the younger section of the Congress led by Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhas Chandra Bose were also angered. The younger section regarded the idea of dominion status in the report as a step backward, and the developments at the All-Parties Conference strengthened their criticism of the dominion status idea. Nehru and Subhas Bose rejected the Congress-modified goal and jointly set up the Independence for India League. Summary. Simon Commission came in 1928 to explore possibility of further constitutional advance, boycotted by Indians, because no Indian represented in the commission. Responses of various groups. Ambedkar's Memorandum. Impact of Simon Commission. Nehru Report. 1928 First Indian effort to draft constitutional scheme. Recommended dominion status not separate electorates, but joint electorates with reserved seats for minorities. Linguistic provinces, 19 fundamental rights, responsible government at center and in provinces, responses of various groups. CDM and Round Table Conferences, 385,385, Chapter 19 Civil Disobedience Movement, and Round Table Conferences. The run-up to Civil Disobedience Movement. Calcutta Session of Congress. It was at the Calcutta Session of the Congress in December 1928 that the Nehru Report was approved, but the younger elements led by Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhas Chandra Bose and Satyamurthy expressed their dissatisfaction with dominion status as the goal of Congress. Instead, they demanded that the Congress adopt Purna Swaraj or complete independency as its goal. The older leaders like Gandhi and Motilal Nehru wished that the dominion status demand not be dropped in haste, as consensus over it had been developed with great difficulty over the years. They suggested that a 2-year grace period be given to the government to accept the demand for a dominion status. Later, under pressure from the younger elements, this period was reduced to 1 year. Now, the Congress decided that if the government did not accept a constitution based on dominion status by the end of the year, the Congress would not only demand complete independence but would also launch a civil disobedience movement to attain its goal. 386. A brief history of modern India political activity during 1929. Gandhi traveled incessantly during 1929, preparing people for direct political action. telling the youth to prepare for the fiery ordeal, helping to organize constructive work in villages, and redressing specific grievances on lines of the Bartley agitation of 1928. The Congress Working Committee, CWC, organized a foreign cloth boycott committee to propagate an aggressive program of boycotting foreign cloth and public burning of foreign cloth. Gandhi initiated the campaign in March 1929 in Calcutta and was arrested. This was followed by bonfires of foreign cloth all over the country. Other developments which kept the political temperature high during 1929 included the Meerut conspiracy case, March, bomb explosion in Central Legislative Assembly by Bhagat Singh and B.K. Dutt, April, and the coming to power of the minority Labour government led by Ramsay MacDonald in England in May. And Wedgwood Ben became the Secretary of State for India. Irwin's Declaration, October 31, 1929. Before the Simon Commission report came out, the declaration by Lord Irwin was made. It was the combined effort of the Labour government, always more sympathetic to Indian aspirations than the Conservatives, and a Conservative viceroy. The purpose behind the declaration was to restore faith in the ultimate purpose of British policy. The declaration was made in the form of an official communiqué in the Indian Gazette on October 31, 1929. It said, in view of the doubts which have been expressed both in Great Britain and in India regarding the interpretations Tobe placed on the intentions of the British government in enacting the Statute of 1919, I am authorized on behalf of His Majesty's government to state clearly that in their judgment it is implicit in the Declaration of 1917 that the natural issue of India's constitutional progress as they contemplated is the attainment of Dominion status. However, there was no time scale. The Dominion status promised by Irwin would not be available for a long time to come. There was in reality nothing new or revolutionary in the declaration. CDM and Round Table Conferences, 387. Lord Irwin also promised a Round Table Conference after the Simon Commission submitted its report. Delhi Manifesto on November 2, 1929. A conference of prominent national leaders issued a Delhi Manifesto, which put forward certain conditions for attending the Round Table Conference. 1. That the purpose of the Round Table Conference should be not to determine whether or when Dominion status was to be reached, but to formulate a constitution for implementation of the Dominion status, the use acting as a constituent assembly, and the basic principle of Dominion status should be immediately accepted too. That the Congress should have majority representation at the conference, and 3. There should be a general amnesty for political prisoners and a policy of conciliation. Gandhi, along with Motilal Nehru and other political leaders, met Lord Irwin in December 1929, after the vice had narrowly escaped after a bomb was detonated meaning to hit the train he was traveling in. They asked the Viceroy for assurance that the purpose of the Round Table Conference was to draft a constitutional scheme for Dominion status. That was not the purpose of the conference, said Irwin. Viceroy Irwin rejected the demands put forward in the Delhi Manifesto. The stage for confrontation was to begin now. Lahore Congress and Purna Swaraj, Jawaharlal Nehru, who had done more than anyone else to popularize the concept of Purna Swaraj, was nominated the president for the Lahore session of the Congress, December 1929, mainly due to Gandhi's backing. 15 out of 18 provincial Congress committees had opposed Nehru. Nehru was chosen because of the appositeness of the occasion, Congress, acceptance of complete independency as its goal, and to acknowledge the upsurge of youth which had made the anti-Simon campaign a huge success. Nehru declared in his presidential address, "We have 388, a brief history of modern Indiano and open conspiracy to free this country from foreign rule, and you, comrades, and all our countrymen and countrywomen are invited to join it." Explaining that liberation did not mean only throwing off the foreign yoke, he said, "I must frankly confess that I am a socialist and a republican, and am no believer in kings and princes, or in the order which produce us, modern kings of industry, who have greater power of the lives and fortunes of men than even the kings of old, and whose methods are as predatory as those of the old feudal aristocracy." Spelling out the methods of struggle, he said, "Any great movement for liberation today must necessarily be a mass movement, and mass movements must essentially be peaceful, except in times of organized revolt." The following major decisions were taken at the Lahore session. Black Circle, the Round Table Conference, was to be boycotted. Black Circle complete independence was declared as the aim of the Congress. Black Circle Congress Working Committee was authorized to launch a program of civil disobedience, including non-payment of taxes, and all members of legislatures were asked to resign their seats. Black Circle January 26, 1930 was fixed as the first Independence, Swarajya Day, to be celebrated everywhere. December 31, 1929, at midnight on the banks of River Ravi, the newly adopted tricolor flag of freedom was hoisted by Jawaharlal Nehru amidst slogans of Inquilab Zindabad. January 26, 1930. The Independence Pledge public meetings were organized all over the country in villages and towns, and the Independence Pledge was read out in local languages, and the national flag was hoisted. This pledge, which is supposed to have been drafted by Gandhi, made the following points. It is the inalienable right of Indians to have freedom. The British government in India has not only deprived CDM and Round Table Conferences 389 us of freedom and exploited us, but has also ruined us economically, politically, culturally, and spiritually. India must, therefore, sever the British connection and attain Purna Swaraj or complete independence. We are being economically ruined by high revenue, destruction of village industries with no substitutions made, while customs, currency, and exchange rate are manipulated to our disadvantage. No real political powers are given, rights of free association are denied to us, and all administrative talent in us is killed. Black culturally, the system of education has torn us from our moorings. Spiritually, compulsory disarmament has made us unmanly. We hold it a crime against man and God to submit any longer to British rule. We will prepare for complete independence by withdrawing, as far as possible, all voluntary association from the British government, and will prepare for civil disobedience through non-payment of taxes. By this, an end of this inhuman rule is assured. We will carry out the Congress instructions for purpose of establishing Purna Swaraj, Civil Disobedience Movement, the Salt Satyagraha and other upsurges Gandhi's 11 demands to carry forward the mandate given by the Lahore Congress. Gandhi presented 11 demands to the government and gave an ultimatum of January 31, 1930 to accept or reject the said demands. The demands were as follows. Issues of general interest 1. Reduce expenditure on army and civil services by 50%. 2. Introduce total prohibition. 390. A brief history of modern India. 3. Carry out reforms in Criminal Investigation Department CID. 4. Change Arms Act allowing popular control of issue of firearms licenses. 5. Release political prisoners. 6. Accept postal reservation bill, specific bourgeois demands. 7. Reduce rupee sterling exchange ratio to 1:4. Introduce textile protection. 9. Reserve coastal shipping for Indians, specific peasant demands. 10. Reduce land revenue by 50%. 11. Abolish salt tax and government salt monopoly. With no positive response forthcoming from the government on these demands, the Congress Working Committee invested Gandhi with full powers to launch the Civil Disobedience Movement at a time and place of his case. By February end, Gandhi had decided to make salt the central formula for the movement. Why salt was chosen as the important theme, as Gandhi said. There is no other article like salt, outside water, by taxing which the government can reach the starving millions, the sick, the maimed, and the utterly helpless. It is the most inhuman poll tax the ingenuity of men can devise. Salt in a flash linked the ideal of Swaraj with a most concrete and universal grievance of the rural poor, and with no socially divisive implications like a no-rent campaign. Salt afforded a very small but psychologically important income, like Khadi, for the poor through self-help. Like Khadi, again, it offered to the urban populace the opportunity of a symbolic identification with mass suffering. Dandi March, March 12, April 6, 1930. On March 2, 1930, Gandhi informed the Viceroy of his plan of action. According to this plan, few realized its significance when it was first announced. Gandhi, along with a band of 78 members of Sabarmati Ashram, was to march from his CDM and Round Table Conferences 391 headquarters in Ahmedabad through the villages of Gujarat for 240 miles. On reaching the coast at Dandi, the salt law was to be violated by collecting salt from the beach. Even before the proposed march began, thousands thronged to the ashram. Gandhi gave the following directions for future action. Black circle wherever possible, civil disobedience of the salt law should be started. Black circle foreign liquor and cloth shops can be picketed. Black circle we can refuse to pay taxes if we have the requisite strength. Black circle lawyers can give up practice. Black circle public can boycott law courts by refraining from litigation. Black circle government servants can resign from their posts. Black circle all these should be subject to one condition. Truth-hand nonviolence as means to attain Swaraj should be faithfully adhered to. Black circle local leaders should be obeyed after Gandhi's arrest. The historic march, marking the launch of the Civil Disobedience Movement, began on March 12, and Gandhi broke the salt law by picking up a lump of salt at Dandi on April 6. The violation of the law was seen as a symbol of Indian people's resolve not to live under British-made laws, and therefore under British rule. Gandhi openly asked the people to make salt from seawater in their homes and violate the salt law. The march, its progress and its impact in the people was well covered by newspapers. In Gujarat, 300 village officials resigned in answer to Gandhi's appeal. Congress workers engaged themselves in grassroots-level organizational tasks. Spread of salt law disobedience once, the way was cleared by Gandhi's ritual at Dandi. Defiance of the salt laws started all over the country. Nehru's arrest in April 1930 for defiance of the salt law evoked huge demonstrations in Madras, Calcutta, and Karachi. Gandhi's arrest came on May 4, 1930 when he had announced they would lead a raid on Darasana salt works on the west. 392. A brief history of modern India coast. Gandhi's arrest was followed by massive protests in Bombay, Delhi, Calcutta, and in Sholapur, where the response was the most fierce. After Gandhi's arrest, the CWC sanctioned Black Circle non-payment of revenue in riot-wary areas, Black Circle no chowkidar tax campaign in zamindari areas, and violation of forest laws in the central provinces. Satyagraha at different places. A brief survey of the nature of civil disobedience movement in different parts of the subcontinent is given below. Tamil Nadu in April 1930, C. Rajagopalachari organized a march from Thirukchirappalli, Trichinapalli as it was called by the British, to Vedaraniyam on the Tanjore, or Thanjavur, coast to break the salt law. The event was followed by widespread picketing of foreign cloth shops. The liquor campaign gathered forceful support in interior regions of Coimbatore, Madura, Viruthanagar, etc. Although Rajaji tried to keep the movement non-violent, violent eruptions of masses and the violent repressions of the police began. To break the Chulai Mills strike, police force was used. Unemployed weavers attacked liquor shops and police pickets at Gudiyadam, while the peasants, suffering from falling prices, rioted at Badanayakanur in Madura. Malabar K. Kelapan, a Nair Congress leader famed for the Vaikam Satyagraha, organized salt marches. P. Krishna Pillai, the future founder of the Kerala Communist Movement, heroically defended the national flag in the face-off police lathi charge on Calicut Beach in November 1930. Andhra Region District salt marches were organized in East and West Godavari, Krishna, and Guntur. A number of Sibarams, military-style camps, were set up to serve as headquarters of the salt satyagraha. The merchants contributed to Congress funds, and the dominant caste Kama and Raju cultivators defied repressive measures. But the mass support like that in the non-cooperation movement, 1921-22, was missing in the region. Orissa under Gopal Bandhu Chowdhury, a Gandhian leader, salt satyagraha proved effective in the coastal regions off Balasore, Cuttack, and Puri districts. CDM and Round Table Conferences, 393 Black Circle Assam, the civil disobedience failed to regain the heights attained in 1921-22 due to divisive issues. The growing conflicts between Assamese and Bengalis, Hindus and Muslims, and the tensions developing from the inflow of Muslim peasants from the densely populated East Bengal. However, a successful student strike against the Cunningham Circular, which banned students' participation in politics, was seen in May 1930. Chandraprabha Sakyani, in December 1930, incited the Aboriginal Kachari villages to break forest laws, which was, however, denied by the Assam Congress leadership. Bengal, the Bengal Congress, divided into two factions led by Subhas Chandra Bose and J.M. Sengupta, was involved in the Calcutta Corporation election. This resulted in alienation of most of Calcutta Bhadralok leaders from the rural masses. Also, communal riots were seen in Dhaka, now Dhaka and Kishoreganj, and there was little participation of Muslims in the movements. Despite this, Bengal provided the largest number of arrests as well as the highest amount of violence. Midnapur, Arambagh, and several rural pockets witnessed powerful movements developed around salt satyagraha and chowkidari tax. During the same period, Surya Sen's Chittagong revolt group carried out a raid on two armories and declared the establishment of a provisional government. Bihar, Champaran, and Saran were the first two districts to start salt satyagraha. In landlocked Bihar, manufacture of salt on a large scale was not practicable, and at most places it was a mere gesture. In Patna, Naka's Pond was chosen as a site to make salt and break the salt law under Ambika Kant Sinha. However, very soon, a very powerful no chowkidari tax agitation replaced the salt satyagraha, owing to physical constraints in making salt. By November 1930, sale of foreign cloth and liquor dramatically declined, and administration collapsed in several parts like the Barhi region of Munjur, the tribal belt of Chhattanagpur, now in Jharkhand, saw instances of lower-class militancy. Banga Majhi and Samra Majhi, influenced by Gandhism, led a movement in Hazaribagh. 394. A brief history of modern India which combined socio-religious reform along Sanskritizing lines, in which followers were asked to give up meat and liquor and use khadi. However, the Santhals were reported to be taking up illegal distillation of liquor on a large scale under the banner of Gandhi. It was observed that while most big zamindars remained loyal to the government, small landlords and better-off tenants participated in the movement. But several times, increased lower-class militancy lowered the enthusiasm of the small landlords and better-off tenants. Peshawar here, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan's educational and social reform work among the Pathans had politicized them. Ghaffar Khan, also called Badshah Khan and Frontier Gandhi, had started the first Pushto political monthly Pakhtun and had organized a volunteer brigade, Kudai Kidmakers, popularly known as the Red Shirts, who were pledged to the freedom struggle and nonviolence. On April 23, 1930, the arrest of Congress leaders in the NWFP led to mass demonstrations in Peshawar, which was virtually in the hands of the crowds for more than a week till order was restored on May 4. This was followed by a reign of terror and martial law. It was here that a section of Garhwal Rifles soldiers refused to fire on an unarmed crowd. This upsurge in a province with 92% Muslim population left the British government nervous. Sholapur, this industrial town of southern Maharashtra, saw the fiercest response to Gandhi's arrest. Textile workers went on a strike from May 7, and along with other residents burnt liquor shops and other symbols of government authority such as railway stations, police stations, municipal buildings, law courts, etc. The activists established a virtual parallel government which could only be dislodged with martial law after May 16. Dharasana on May 21, 1930, Sarojini Naidu, Imam Sahib, and Manilal Gandhi's son, took up the unfinished task of leading a raid on the Dharasana salt works. The unarmed and peaceful crowd was met with a brutal lathi-charge which left 2 dead and 320 injured. This new form of salt satyagraha was eagerly adopted by people in Wadala, Bombay, Karnataka, Sanakata salt works, Andhra, Midnapore, Balasore, Puri, and Cuttack. CDM and round table conferences, 395 views Gandhiji's body is in jail, but his soul is with you. India's prestige is now in your hands. You must not use any violence under any circumstances. You will be beaten, but you must not resist. You must not even raise a hand to ward off blows. Sarojini Naidu. On the eve of Dharasana salt satyagraha, though everyone knew that within a few minutes he would be beaten down, and perhaps killed, I could detect no signs of wavering or fear. They marched steadily with heads up. Webb Miller, an American journalist, reporting in Dharasana salt satyagraha Gujarat, the impact was felt in Anand, Borsad, and Nadiad areas in Kedah district, Bardoli in Surat district, and Jambusar in Bharuch district. A determined no-tax movement was organized here, which included refusal to pay land revenue. Villagers crossed the border into neighboring princely states, such as Baroda, with their families and belongings, and camped in the open for months to evade police repression. The police retaliated by destroying their property and confiscating their land. Maharashtra, Karnataka, central provinces, the Sariyas saw defiance of forest laws such as grazing and timber restrictions and public sale of illegally acquired forest produce. United Provinces, a no-revenue campaign was organized. A call was given to zamindars to refuse to pay revenue to the government. Under a no-rent campaign, a call was given to tenants against zamindars. Since most of the zamindars were loyalists, the campaign became virtually a no-rent campaign. The activity picked up speed in October 1930, especially in Agra and Rai Bareli. Manipur and Nagaland, these areas took a brave part in the movement. At the young age of 13, Rani Gaidanliu, a Naga spiritual leader, who followed her cousin Hepu Jadnang, born in what is now the state of Manipur, raised the banner of revolt against foreign rule. "We are free people. The white men should not rule over us," she declared. She urged the people not to pay taxes or work for the British, in the tradition established by the freedom struggle in the 396, A Brief History of Modern Indiarist of India. As the reformist religious movement steadily turned political, the British authorities caught Hepu Jadnang and hanged him on charges of treason in 1931. A manhunt was launched for Rani Gaidanliu. She outwitted the British till October 1932, when she was finally captured. She was later sentenced to life imprisonment. It was the interim government of India set up in 1946 that finally ordered her release from Tura jail. Forms of mobilization of masses was also carried out through Prabhat Faris, Vanner Senas, Manjari Senas, secret patrikas, and magic lantern shows. Impact of agitation 1. Imports of foreign cloth and other items fell 2. Government suffered a loss of income from liquor, excise, and land revenue 3. Elections to Legislative Assembly were largely boycotted. Extent of mass participation: several sections of the population participated in the Civil Disobedience Movement. Women Gandhi had specially asked women to play a leading part in the movement. Soon, they became a familiar sight, picketing outside liquor shops, opium dens, and shops selling foreign cloth. For Indian women, the movement was the most liberating experience and can truly be said to have marked their entry into the public sphere. Students along with women, students and youth played the most prominent part in the boycott of foreign cloth and liquor. Muslims, the Muslim participation was nowhere near the 1900-2022 level because of appeals by Muslim leaders to stay away from the movement and because of active government encouragement to communal dissension. Still, some areas such as the NWFP saw an overwhelming participation. Middle-class Muslim participation was quite significant in Senhata, Tripura, Gaibenta, Bagyura, and Noakhali. In Dhaka, Muslim leaders, shopkeepers, lower-class people, and upper-class women were active. The Muslim CDM and round-table conferences, 397 weaving community in Bihar, Delhi, and Lucknow, were also effectively mobilized. Merchants and petty traders, they were very enthusiastic. Traders, associations, and commercial bodies were active in implementing the boycott, especially in Tamil Nadu and Punjab. Tribals were active participants in central provinces, Maharashtra, and Karnataka. The workers participated in Bombay, Calcutta, Madras, Sholapur, etc. Peasants were active in the United Provinces, Bihar, and Gujarat. Government response. Efforts for truce. The government's attitude throughout 1930 was ambivalent as it was puzzled and perplexed. It faced the classic dilemma: damned if you do, damned if you do. If force was applied, the Congress cried repression, and if little action taken, the Congress cried victory. Either way, the government suffered an erosion of power. Even Gandhi's arrest came after much vacillation. But once the repression began, the ordinances banning civil liberties were freely used, including the press being gagged. Provincial governments were given freedom to ban civil disobedience organizations. The Congress Working Committee was, however, not declared illegal till June. There were lathi charges and firing on unarmed crowds which left several killed and wounded, while thousands of satyagrahis besides Gandhi and other Congress leaders were imprisoned. The government repression and publication of the Simon Commission report, which contained no mention of dominion status and was in other ways also a regressive document, further upset even moderate political opinion. In July 1930, the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, suggested a round-table conference and reiterated the goal of dominion status. He also accepted the suggestion that Tej Bahadur Sapru and Mr. Jayakar be allowed to explore the possibility of peace between the Congress and the government. In August 1930, Motilal and Jawaharlal Nehru were taken to Uravada jail to meet Gandhi and discuss the 398, a brief history of modern India possibility of a settlement. The Nehrus and Gandhi unequivocally reiterated the demands of 1. Right of secession from Britain, 2. Complete national government with control over defense and finance, and 3. An independent tribunal to settle Britain's financial claims. Talks broke down at this point. Gandhi-Irwin Pact on January 25, 1931. Gandhi and all other members of the Congress Working Committee, CWC, were released unconditionally. The CWC authorized Gandhi to initiate discussions with the Viceroy. As a result of these discussions, a pact was signed between the Viceroy, representing the British Indian government, and Gandhi, representing the Indian people, in Delhi on March 5, 1931. This Delhi Pact, also known as the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, placed the Congress in an equal footing with the government. Irwin on behalf of the government agreed on 1. Immediate release of all political prisoners not convicted of violence, 2. Remission of all fines not yet collected, 3. Return of all lands not yet sold to third parties, 4. Lenient treatment to those government servants who had resigned, 5. Right to make salt in coastal villages for personal consumption, not for sale, 6. Right to peaceful and non-aggressive picketing, and 7. Withdrawal of emergency ordinances. The Viceroy, however, turned down 2 of Gandhi's demands. Public inquiry into police excesses, and Roman 2, commutation of Bhagat Singh and his comrade's death sentence to life sentence. Gandhi, on behalf of the Congress, agreed. To suspend the Civil Disobedience Movement, and Roman 2, to participate in the next round-table conference on the constitutional question around the 3 linchpins of federation, Indian responsibility, and CDM and round-table conferences, 399 reservations and safeguards that may be necessary in India's interests, covering such areas as defense, external affairs, position of minorities, financial credit of India, and discharge of other obligations. Evaluation of Civil Disobedience Movement was Gandhi-Irwin Pact a retreat. Gandhi's decision to suspend the Civil Disobedience Movement as agreed under the Gandhi-Irwin Pact was not a retreat. Because mass movements are necessarily short-lived. Roman 2, capacity of the masses to make sacrifices, unlike that of the activists, is limited. And Roman 3, there were signs of exhaustion after September 1930, especially among shopkeepers and merchants, who had participated so enthusiastically. No doubt, youth were disappointed. They had participated enthusiastically and wanted the world to end with a bang and not with a whimper. Peasants of Gujarat were disappointed because their lands were not restored immediately. Indeed, they were restored only during the rule of the Congress ministry in the province. But many people were jubilant that the government had been made to regard their movement as significant and treat their leader as an equal, and sign a pact with him. The political prisoners, when released from jails, were given a hero welcome. Comparison to non-cooperation movement, there were certain aspects in which the Civil Disobedience Movement differed from the non-cooperation movement. 1. The stated objective this time was complete independence, and not just remedying 2 specific wrongs and a vaguely worded Swaraj. 2. The methods involved violation of law from the very beginning, and not just non-cooperation with foreign rule. 3. There was a decline in forms of protests involving the intelligentsia, such as lawyers giving up practice, students giving up government schools to join national schools and colleges. 4. Muslim participation was nowhere near that in the non-cooperation movement level. 400. A brief history of modern India. 5. No major labor upsurge coincided with the movement. 6. The massive participation of peasants and business groups compensated for decline of other features. 7. The number of those imprisoned was about 3 times more this time. 8. The Congress was organizationally stronger. Karachi Congress Session, 1931. In March 1931, a special session of the Congress was held at Karachi to endorse the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. 6 days before the session, which was held on March 29, Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, and Rajguru were executed. Throughout Gandhi's route to Karachi, he was greeted with black flag demonstrations by the Punjab Naujawan Bharat Sabha, in protest against his failure to secure commutation of the death sentence for Bhagat and his comrades. Congress resolutions at Karachi Black Circle, while disapproving of and dissociating itself from political violence, the Congress admired the bravery and sacrifice of the three martyrs. The Delhi Pact or Gandhi-Irwin Pact was endorsed. The goal of Purna Swaraj was reiterated. Two resolutions were adopted, one on fundamental rights and the other on national economic program, which made the session particularly memorable. The resolution on fundamental rights guaranteed free speech and free press right to form associations use India is one vast prison house. I repudiate this law. M.K. Gandhi to Lord Irwin Gandhi was the best policeman the British had in India. Ellen Wilkinson Dandy March is the kindergarten stage of revolution. Based on the notion that King Emperor can be unseated by boiling seawater in a kettle. Brailsford, an English journalist. CDM and Round Table Conferences. 401 right to assemble universal adult, franchise equal legal rights irrespective of caste, creed, and sex neutrality of state in religious matters. Free and compulsory primary education protection to culture, language. Script of minorities and linguistic groups. The resolution on national economic program included substantial reduction in rent and revenue in the case of landholders, and peasants' exemption from rent for uneconomic holdings, relief from agricultural indebtedness, control of usury, better conditions of work, including a living wage, limited hours of work and protection of women workers in the industrial sector, right to workers and peasants to form unions, state ownership and control of key industries, mines, and means of transport. This was the first time the Congress spelt out what Swaraj would mean for the masses. In order to end exploitation of masses, political freedom must include economic freedom of starving millions. Karachi Resolution was to remain, in essence, the basic political and economic program of the Congress in later years. The Round Table Conference is the Viceroy of India, Lord Irwin, and the Prime Minister of Britain, Ramsay MacDonald, agreed that a Round Table Conference should be held, as the recommendations of the Simon Commission report were clearly inadequate. First Round Table Conference. The first Round Table Conference was held in London between November 1930 and January 1931. It was opened officially by King George V on November 12, 1930, and chaired by Ramsay MacDonald. 402. A Brief History of Modern India. This was the first conference arranged between and the Indians as equals. The Congress and some prominent business leaders refused to attend, but many other groups of Indians were represented at the conference. The Indian princely states were represented by the Maharaja of Alwar, Maharaja of Baroda, Nawab of Bhopal, Maharaja of Bikaner, Rana of Dalpur, Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir, Maharaja of Nawanagar, Maharaja of Patiala, Chancellor of the Chamber of Princes, Maharaja of Ruwat, Chief Sahib of Sangli, Sir Prabhashankar Patani Bhavnagar, Manubhai Mehta Baroda, Sardar Sahibzada Sultan Ahmed Khan Gwalior, Akbar Haidari Hyderabad, Mirza Ismail Mysore, Kal Kailas Narain Haksar, Jammu and Kashmir. The Muslim League sent Aga Khan III, leader of British Indian delegation, Maulana Mohammad Ali Jauhar, Muhammad Shafi, Mohammad Ali Jinnah, Mohammad Zafar Allah Khan, A.K. Fazlul Haq, Hafiz Ghulam Hussain Hidayat Allah Dr. Shafat Ahmed Khan, Rajashur Mohammad Khan of Domli, and A.H. Ghaznavi. The Hindu Mahasabha and its sympathizers were represented by B.S. Munj, M.R. Jayakar, and Diwan Bahadur Raja Narendra Nath. The Sikhs were represented by Sardar Ujjal Singh and Sardar Sampuran Singh. For the Parsis, Firoz Sethna, Kawasji Jahangir, and Homi Modi attended. Begum Jahanara Shahnawaz and Radhabai Subbarayan represented women. The Liberals were represented by J.N. Basu, Tej Bahadur Sapru, C.Y. Chintamani, V.S. Srinivasa Sastry, and Chimanlal Haralal Setalvad. The depressed classes were represented by B.R. Ambedkar and Redamalai Srinivasan. The Justice Party sent Arcot Ramasamy Mudaliar, Bhaskaro Vithajuro Jadhav, and Sir A.P. Patro. Labour was represented by N.M. Joshi and B. Shiva Rao. K.T. Paul represented the Indian Christians, while Henry Gidney represented the Anglo-Indians, and the Europeans were represented by Sir Hubert Carr, Sir Oscar Glanville, Burma, T.F. Gavin Jones, C.E. Wood, Madras. There were also representatives of the landlords from Bihar, the United Provinces and Orissa, the universities, Burma, the Sindh, and some other provinces. The government of India was represented by Narendra. CDM and Round Table Conferences, 403 Nath Law, Bhupendra Nath Mitra, C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, and M. Ramachandra Rao. Outcome: nothing much was achieved at the conference. It was generally agreed that India was to develop into a federation. There were to be safeguards regarding defense and finance, while other departments were to be transferred. But little was done to implement these recommendations, and civil disobedience continued in India. The British government realized that the participation of the Indian National Congress was necessary in any discussion on the future of constitutional government in India. Second Round Table Conference members of the Indian Liberal Party, such as Tej Bahadur Sapru, C.Y. Chintamani, and Srinivasa Sastry, appealed to Gandhi to talk with the Viceroy. Gandhi and Irwin reached a compromise, which came to be called the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, the Delhi Pact. The Second Round Table Conference was held in London from September 7, 1931 to December 1, 1931, the Indian National Congress nominated Gandhi as its sole representative. A. Rangaswamy Iyengar and Madan Mohan Malaviya were also there. There were a large number of Indian participants, besides the Congress. The princely states were represented by Maharaja of Alwar, Maharaja of Baroda, Nawab of Bhopal, Maharaja of Bikaner, Maharaja of Kutch, Rana of Dhalpur, Maharaja of Indore, Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir, Maharaja of Kapurthala, Maharaja of Nawanagar, Maharaja of Patiala, Maharaja of Rewa, Chief Sahib of Sangli, Raj of Sarila, Sir Prabhashankar Patani, Bhavnagar, Manubhai Mehta, Baroda, Sardar Sahibzada Sultan Ahmed Khan, Gwalior, Sir Muhammad Akbar Haidari, Hyderabad, Mirza Ismail Mysore, Kalkayan, Haksar Jammu and Kashmir, T. Raghavaya Travancore, Liaquat Hayat Khan Patiala. The Muslims were represented by Aga Khan III, Maulana Shaukat Ali, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, A.K. Fazlul Huq, Muhammad Iqbal, Muhammad Shafi, Muhammad Zafar Ali Khan, Sid Ali Imam, Malvi. 404. A Brief History of Modern India. Muhammad Shafi Dadi, Raja Shur Muhammad Khan of Domli, A.H. Ghaznavi, Hafiz Hidayat Hussain, Said Muhammad Padshah Sahib Bahadur, Dr. Shafat Ahmed Khan, Jamal Muhammad, and Nawab Sahibzada Said Muhammad Mayor Shah. Hindu groups were represented by Amar Jayakar, B.S. Munj, and Diwan Bahadur Raja Narendra Nath. The liberals at the conference were J. N. Basu, C. Y. Chintamani, Tej Bahadur Sapru, V.S. Srinivasa Sastry, and Chimanlal Harulal Setalvad. The Justice Party sent Raja of Babali, Arcot Ramasamy Mudaliar, Sir A.P. Patro, and Baskaro Vithajuro Jadhav. The depressed classes were represented by B.R. Ambedkar and Redamalai Srinivasan. Sardar Ujjal Singh and Sardar Sampuran Singh represented the Sikhs. The Parsis were represented by Kawasji Jahangir, Homi Modi, and Firoz Sethna. Indian Christians were represented by Shurndra Kumar Datta and A.T. Pannerselvam. Industry was represented by Ghanshyamdas Burla, Sir Purushottamdas Thakurdas, and Mankshi Dadabhoy. Labor was represented by N.M. Joshi, B. Shiva Rao, and V.V. Giri. The representatives for Indian women were Sarojini Naidu, Begum Jahanara Shahnawaz, and Radhabai Subbarayan. The universities were represented by Sid Sultan Ahmed and Bisheshwar Dale Seth. Representatives of Burma and from the provinces of Sindh, Assam, Central Provinces, and the NWFP also attended. The government of India was represented by C. P. Ramaswamy Iyer, Narendra Nath Law, and M. Ramachandra Rao. Not much was expected from the conference because of the following reasons. By this time, Lord Irwin had been replaced by Lord Willingdon as Viceroy in India. Just before the conference began, the Labour government in England had been replaced by a national government, which was an uneasy coalition between Labour and Conservatives. The British were also injured by the increased revolutionary activities, which had claimed many European lives in India. The right wing, or Conservatives in Britain, led by Churchill, strongly objected to the British government negotiating with the Congress on an equal basis. They CDM and Round Table Conferences 405 instead demanded a strong government in India. The Prime Minister, Ramsay MacDonald, headed the Conservative-dominated cabinet with a weak and reactionary Secretary of State for India, Samuel Hoare. At the conference, Gandhi, and therefore the Congress, claimed to represent all people of India against imperialism. The other delegates, however, did not share this view. Historians point out that many of the delegates were conservative, government loyalists, and communalists, and these groups were used by the colonial government to neutralize the efforts of Gandhi. Because of the participation of a large number of groups, the British government claimed that the Congress did not represent the interests of all of India. Gandhi pointed out that there was a need of a partnership between Britain and India on the basis of equality. He put forward the demand for the immediate establishment of a responsible government at the center, as well as in the provinces. He also reiterated that the Congress alone represented political India. Saying that the untouchables were Hindus, and thus not to be treated as a minority, he discarded the idea of a separate electorate for them. He also said there was no need for separate electorates or special safeguards for Muslims or other minorities. Many of the other delegates disagreed with Gandhi. The session soon got deadlocked on the question of the minorities. Separate electorates were being demanded by the Muslims, depressed classes, Christians, and Anglo-Indians. All these came together in a minorities pact. Gandhi fought desperately against this concerted move to make all constitutional progress conditional on the solving of this issue. The princes were also not too enthusiastic about a federation, especially after the possibility of the formation of a Congress government at the center had receded after the suspension of Civil Disobedience Movement. Outcome: the lack of agreement among the Manite legate groups meant that no substantial results regarding India's constitutional future would come out of the conference. The session ended with MacDonald's announcement of 406, A Brief History of Modern India, I-2 Muslim-majority provinces, Northwest Frontier Province, NWFP and Sindh. Roman II, the setting up of an Indian Consultative Committee. Roman III, setting up of 3 expert committees, finance, franchise, and states. And Roman IV, the prospect of a unilateral British communal award if Indians failed to agree. The government refused to concede the basic Indian demand of freedom. Gandhi returned to India on December 28, 1931 Third Round Table Conference. The Third Round Table Conference, held between November 17, 1932 and December 24, 1932, was not attended by the Indian National Congress and Gandhi. It was ignored by most other Indian leaders. The Indian states were represented by Akbar Haidari, Dewan of Hyderabad, Mirza Ismail, Dewan of Mysore, VT, Krishnamachari, Dewan of Baroda, Wajahat Hussain, Jammu and Kashmir, Sir Sukhdev Prasad, Udaipur, Jaipur, Jodhpur, J.A. Servikol Hapur, Raja Audnarin Baisaria, Bhopal, Manupai Mehta Bikaner, Nawab Liaquat Hayat Khan Patiala, Fade Nasib Khan Alwar State, LF, Rushbrook Williams, Nawanagar, and Raja of Sarilla, small states. Other Indian representatives were Aga Khan III, B. R. Ambedkar, Ramakrishna Ranga Rao of Babali, Sir Hubert Carr, Nanak Chand Pandit, A.H. Ghaznavi, Henry Gidney, Hafiz Hidayat Hussain, Mohammad Iqbal, M.R. Jayakar, Kawasji Jehangir, N.M. Joshi, Narsimhachintaman Kelkar, Arkat Ramasamy Mudalir, Begum Jahanara Shahnawaz, A.P. Patra, Tejbahadur Sapru, Dr. Shafat Ahmad Khan, Sir Shadi Lal, Tara Singh Malhotra, Sir N. Ripendranath Sarkar, Sir Purushottamdas Thakurdas, Mohammad Zafar Ullah Khan. Again, like in the two previous conferences, little was achieved. The recommendations were published in a white paper in March 1933 and debated in the British Parliament afterwards. A joint select committee was formed to analyse the recommendations and formulate a new act for India, and that committee produced a draft bill in February 1935, which was enforced as the Government of India Act of 1935 in July 1935. CDM and Round Table Conferences, 407 Civil Disobedience resumed on the failure of the Second Round Table Conference. The Congress Working Committee decided on December 291,931 to resume the Civil Disobedience Movement. During truce period, March, December 1931, some activity during the period March to December 1931 kept alive the spirit of defiance. In the United Provinces, the Congress had been leading a movement for rent reduction and against summary evictions. In the NWFP, severe repression had been unleashed against the Kudai kidnappers and the peasants led by them who were agitating against the brutal methods of tax collection by the government. In Bengal, draconian ordinances and mass detentions had been used in the name of fighting terrorism. In September 1931, there was a firing incident on political prisoners in Hijli jail. Changed government attitude after Second RTC, the higher British officials had drawn their own lessons from the Delhi Pact, which they thought had raised the political prestige of the Congress and the political morale of the people, and had undermined British prestige. After the Second Round Table Conference, the British were determined to reverse this trend. There were three main considerations in British policy. 1. Gandhi would not be permitted to build up the tempo for a mass movement again. 2. Goodwill of the Congress was not required, but the confidence of those who supported the British against the Congress, government functionaries, loyalists, etc. Was very essential. 3. The national movement would not be allowed to consolidate itself in rural areas. After the CWC decided to resume the Civil Disobedience Movement, Viceroy Willingdon refused a meeting with Gandhi on December 31. On January 4, 1932, Gandhi was arrested. 408. A brief history of modern India government action. A series of repressive ordinances were issued which ushered in a virtual martial law, though under civilian control, or a civil martial law. Congress organizations at all levels were banned. Arrests were made of activists, leaders, sympathizers, properties were confiscated, Gandhi ashrams were occupied. Repression was particularly harsh on women. Press was gagged and nationalist literature banned. Popular response. People responded with anger. Though unprepared, the response was massive. In the first 4 months alone, about 80,000 satyagrahis, mostly urban and rural poor, were jailed. Other forms of protest included picketing of shops selling liquor and foreign cloth. Illegal gatherings, nonviolent demonstrations, celebrations of national days, symbolic twistings of national flag, non-payment of Chowkidara tax, salt satyagraha, forest law violations, and installation of Asakrit radio transmitter near Bombay. This phase of the civil disobedience movement coincided with upsurges in two princely states, Kashmir and Alwar. But this phase of the movement could not be sustained for long because Gandhi and other leaders had no time to build up the tempo, and II, the masses were not prepared. Finally, in April 1934, Gandhi decided to withdraw the civil disobedience movement. Though people had been cowed down by a superior force, they had not lost political faith in the Congress. They had won freedom in their hearts. Communal Award and Pune Pact. The Communal Award was announced by the British Prime Minister, Ramsay MacDonald, on August 16, 1932. The Communal Award, based on the findings of the Indian Franchise Committee, also called the Lothian Committee, established separate electorates and reserved seats for minorities, including the depressed classes, which were granted 78 reserved seats. Thus, this award accorded separate CDM and Round Table Conferences, 409 electorates for Muslims, Europeans, Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians, depressed classes, and even to the Marathas for some seats in Bombay. The award was perceived by the national leaders led by the Congress as another manifestation of the British policy of divide and rule. It should be noted here that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in Thepast, in his testimony to the Simon Commission, had stressed that the depressed classes should be treated as a distinct, independent minority, separate from the caste Hindus. Even, the Bengal Depressed Classes Association had lobbied for separate electorates with seats reserved according to the proportion of depressed class members to the total population as well as for adult franchise. But the Simon Commission rejected the proposal of separate electorate for the depressed classes. However, it retained the concept of reserving seats. In the second round table conference held in London, Ambedkar again raised the issue of separate electorate for the depressed classes. Earlier in the conference, Ambedkar had attempted to compromise with Gandhi on reserved seats in a common electorate, but Gandhi, who had declared himself the sole representative of India's oppressed masses, rejected Ambedkar's proposal and denounced the other delegates as unrepresentative. Further, Gandhi attempted to strike a deal with Muslims, promising to support their demands as long as the Muslims voted against separate electorates for the depressed classes. It is argued that political considerations might have motivated Gandhi to adopt such a stand. But despite such efforts, a consensus on the minority representation could not be worked out among the Indian delegates. In the wake of such a situation, Ramsay MacDonald, who had chaired the Committee on Minorities, offered to mediate on the condition that the other members of the committee supported his decision. And the outcome of this mediation was the communal award. Main provisions of the communal award: Black Circle Muslims, Europeans, Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians, depressed classes, women, and even the Marathas were to get separate electorates. Such an arrangement for the depressed classes was to be made for a period of 20 years. 410. A brief history of modern India. Black Circle in the provincial legislatures, the seats were to be distributed on communal basis. The existing seats of the provincial legislatures were to be doubled. The Muslims, wherever they were in minority, were to be granted a weightage. Except in the Northwest Frontier Province, 3% seats were to be reserved for women in all provinces. The depressed classes were to be declared /accorded status of minority. The depressed classes were to get double vote, one to be used through separate electorates and the other to be used in the general electorates. Allocation of seats were to be made for laborers, landlords, traders, and industrialists. In the province of Bombay, 7 seats were to be located for the Marathas. Congress stand though opposed to separate electorates. The Congress was not in favor of changing the communal award without the consent of the minorities. Thus, while strongly disagreeing with the communal award, the Congress decided neither to accept it nor to reject it. The effort to separate the depressed classes from the rest of the Hindus, by treating them as separate political entities, was vehemently opposed by all the nationalists. Gandhi's response: Gandhi saw the communal award as an attack on Indian unity and nationalism. He thought it was harmful to both Hinduism and to the depressed classes, since it provided no answer to the socially degraded position of the depressed classes. On said depressed classes were treated as a separate political entity. He argued, the question of abolishing untouchability get undermined, while separate electorates would ensure that the untouchables remained untouchables in perpetuity. He said that what was required was not protection of the so-called interests of the depressed classes, but root and branch eradication of untouchability. Gandhi demanded that the depressed classes be elected. CDM and round table conferences, 411 through joint, and if possible a wider electorate through universal franchise, while expressing no objection to the demand for a larger number of reserved seats. And to press these demands, he went on an indefinite fast on September 201,932. Now leaders of various persuasions, including B.R. Ambedkar, M.C. Raja, and Madan Mohan Malaviya Gatto, they're to hammer out a compromise contained in the Pune Pact. Pune Pact signed by B.R. Ambedkar on behalf of the depressed classes in September 24, 1932. The Pune Pact abandoned the idea of separate electorates for the depressed classes. But the seats reserved for the depressed classes were increased from 71 to 147 in provincial legislatures, and to 18% off total in the central legislature. The Pune Pact was accepted by the government as an amendment to the communal award. Impact of Pune Pact on Dalits. The Pune Pact, despite giving certain political rights to the depressed classes, could not achieve the desired goal of emancipation of the depressed class. It enabled the same old Hindu social order to continue and gave birth to mana problems. The pact made the depressed classes' political tool switch could be used by the majoritarian caste Hindu organizations. It made the depressed classes leaderless, as the true representatives of the classes were unable to win against the stooges who were chosen and supported by the caste Hindu organizations. This led to the depressed classes to submit to the status quo in political, ideological, and cultural fields, and not being able to develop independent and genuine leadership to fight the Brahminical order. It subordinated the depressed classes into being part of the Hindu social order by denying them a separate and distinct existence. The Pune Pact perhaps put obstructions in the way of an ideal society based on equality, liberty, fraternity, and justice. 412. A brief history of modern India. Black Circle. By denying to recognize the Dalits as a separate and distinct element in the national life, it preempted the rights and safeguards for the Dalits in the Constitution of Independent India. Joint electorates and its impact on depressed classes. The Working Committee of the All India Scheduled Caste Federation alleged that in the last elections held under the Government of India Act, 1935, the system of joint electorates deprived the scheduled castes of the right to send true and effective representatives to the legislatures. The committee further said that the provisions of the joint electorate gave Hindu majority the virtual right to nominate members of scheduled castes who were prepared to be the tools of Hindu majority. The Working Committee of the Federation, thus, demanded for the restoration of the system of separate electorates and nullification of the system of joint electorates and reserved seats. Even after signing the Pune Pact, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar continued to denounce the Pune Pact till 1947. Gandhi's Harijan campaign and thoughts on caste determined to undo the divisive intentions of the government's divide and rule policy. Gandhi gave up all his other preoccupations and launched a whirlwind campaign against untouchability. First from jail, and then, after his release in August 1933, from outside jail. While in jail, he set up the All India Anti-Untouchability League in September 1932 and started the weekly Harijan in January 1933. After his release, he shifted to the Satyagraha ashram in Wardha, as he had vowed in 1930 not to return to Sabarmati ashram unless Swaraj was won. Starting from Wardha, he conducted a Harijan tour off the country in the period from November 1933 to July 1934, covering 20,000 km, collecting money for his newly set up Harijan Sevak Sangh, and propagating removal of untouchability, all its forms. He urged political workers to go to villages, CDM and roundtable conferences 413, and work for social, economic, political, and cultural upliftment of the Harijans. He undertook 2 fasts, on May 8 and August 16, 1934, to convince his followers of the seriousness of his effort and the importance of the issue. These fasts created consternation in nationalist ranks, throwing many into an emotional crisis. Throughout his campaign, Gandhi was attacked by orthodox and reactionary elements. These elements disrupted his meetings, held black flag demonstrations against him, and accused him of attacking Hinduism. They also offered support to the government against the Congress and the Civil Disobedience Movement. The government obliged them by defeating the Temple Entry Bill in August 1934. Orthodox Hindu opinion in Bengal was against the acceptance of permanent caste Hindu minority status by the Pune Pact. Throughout his Harijan tour, social work and fasts, Gandhi stressed on certain themes. Black Circle, he put forward a damning indictment of Hindu society for the kind of oppression practiced on Harijans. He called for total eradication of untouchability simability by his plea to throw open temples to Thunachables. He stressed the need for caste Hindus to do penance for untold miseries inflicted on Harijans. For this reason, he was not hostile to his critics such as Ambedkar. He said, Hinduism dies if untouchability lives, untouchability has todi if Hinduism is to live. His entire campaign was based on principles of humanism and reason. He said that the Shastras do not sanction untouchability, and if they did, they should banard as it was against human dignity. Gandhi was not in favor of mixing up the issue of removal of untouchability with that of intercaste marriage and interdining, because he felt that such restrictions existed among caste Hindus and among Harijans themselves, and because the All India campaign at the time was directed against disabilities specific to Harijans. Similarly, he distinguished between abolition of untouchability and abolition of caste system as such. On this, 414, a brief history of modern India. He differed from Ambedkar, who advocated annihilation of the caste system to remove untouchability. Gandhi felt that whatever the limitations and defects of the Varnashram system, there was nothing sinful about it, as there was about untouchability. Untouchability, Gandhi felt, was a product of distinctions of high and low, and not of the caste system itself. If it could be purged of this distinction, the Varnashram could function in such a manner that each caste would be complementary to the other rather than being higher or lower. Anyway, he hoped that believers and critics of the caste system would come together in the fight against untouchability. He believed that the removal of untouchability would have a positive impact on communal and other questions, since opposition to untouchability meant opposing the notion of highness and lowness. He was opposed to using compulsion against the orthodox Hindus, whom he called Sanatanis. They were to be won over by persuasion, by appealing to their reason and their hearts. His fasts were aimed at inspiring friends and followers to redouble their work to abolish untouchability. Gandhi's Harijan campaign included a program of internal reform by Harijans covering education, cleanliness, hygiene, giving up eating of beef and carrion and consumption of liquor, and removing untouchability among themselves. Impact of the campaign. Gandhi repeatedly described the campaign as not a political movement, but as being primarily meant to purify Hinduism and Hindu society. Gradually, the campaign carried the message of nationalism to Harijans, who also happened to be the agricultural laborers in most parts of the country, leading to their increasing participation in the national and peasant movements. Ideological differences and similarities between Gandhi and Ambedkar. Gandhi, the principal architect of the Indian freedom struggle, and B.R. Ambedkar, the principal architect of the Constitution of Independent India, shared many ideas, though in many ways. CDM and Round Table Conferences, 415. They held different beliefs. There is a striking similarity in symbolism involved in some of the actions of both individuals. The burning of foreign cloth by Gandhi and the burning of Manusmriti by Ambedkar are not to be seen as mere acts of sentiment. Rather, foreign cloth and Manusmriti represented the bondage and slavery for India. So too, a pinch of salt from the ocean and a drop of water from the Mahid tank were acts of political catharsis and social philosophy. Gandhi believed that freedom was never to be bestowed but to be wrested from the authority by the people who desire it, whereas Ambedkar expected bestowing of freedom by the imperial rulers. The two leaders differed over the nature and scope of democracy as a method of government. Ambedkar advocated parliamentary system of government for independent India, but Gandhi had very little respect for the parliamentary system of governance. Gandhi believed that democracy tends to get converted into mass democracy with a propensity for domination by leaders. Ambedkar was inclined towards mass democracy as it could act as a pressure on the government with the advancement of the oppressed people. As a political and social activist, Ambedkar had certain principles which were very rigid, while Gandhi had no rigidities of ideology or principles, except the uncompromising notion of nonviolence. Gandhi tried to put forward simple practical alternatives to the political streams of the 20th century like liberalism, communism, and fascism. Ambedkar, on the other hand, had a natural inclination for liberal ideology and desired institutional framework and structures. Ambedkar's politics tended to highlight the aspect of Indian disunity, whereas the Gandhian politics tried to show the aspect of Indian unity. In Hind Swaraj, Gandhi tries to prove that India has always been a nation prior to the beginning of the imperial rule, and it was the British rule who broke this cultural unity. Ambedkar, on the other hand, believed in the notion that Indian unity was the byproduct of the legal system introduced by the imperial state. For Gandhi, Gramraj was Ramraj and real independence for Indians. But for Ambedkar, the status quo nature of the Indian villages denied equality and fraternity and also liberty, as the scourge of casteism and untouchability. 416. A brief history of modern India was most dominant in the rural areas of India. Ambedkar believed that Gramraj would continue the social hierarchy based on discrimination and inequality. So, he vehemently propagated that there was nothing to be proud of the Indian village system. The idea of the use of compulsion or force for social integration, as well as social reforms, was negated by Ambedkar. But the idea of proper education to make the individual desire for change, reform, and integration was the stance where the views of two leaders were the same. The two leaders also differed in their views and approaches in respect of the context of development for deprived classes. For instance, when Gandhi named the depressed classes and the untouchables as Harijan, Ambedkar denounced it as a clever scheme. Thus, when the Depressed Classes League was renamed as Harijan Savak Sangh by Gandhi, Ambedkar left the organization by claiming that, for Gandhi, removal of untouchability was only a platform, not a sincere program. Ambedkar held that the center of religion must be between man, and not between man and God alone, as preached by Gandhi. In the beginning, Ambedkar too wanted to cast away the evil practices prevalent in Hinduism in an attempt to reform and reconstruct, rather than destroy it fully. But in the later phase of his life, he left Hinduism, denouncing it as an entity which couldn't be reformed. Ambedkar denounced the Vedas and other Hindu scriptures. He believed that the Hindu scriptures do not lend themselves to a unified and coherent understanding, and reflect strong contradictions within and across sects. And the caste system and untouchability were the manifestations of Hindu religious scriptures. On the contrary, Gandhi held that caste system in Hinduism has nothing to do with religious precepts and spirituality. For Gandhi, caste and varna are different, and caste is perversive degeneration. In political precepts, Ambedkar believed in freedom of religion, free citizenship, and separation of state and religion. Gandhi also endorsed the idea of freedom of religion, but never approved a separation of politics and religion. But religion, as an agent of social change, was well accepted by both leaders. Both denounced in theory and thinking anything. CDM and Round Table Conferences, 417, that either decried or diminished the role of religion in the life of an individual or in the life of society. Ambedkar envisaged limited sovereign power of the state, and following from that, limited authority for the government. According to him, legal sovereign power should be limited, and people should be the ultimate sovereign. Gandhi too believed in limited sovereign power of the state. According to him, absolute sovereign power of the state would annihilate the spirit and personality of an individual. Gandhi, in fact, believed in least governance being the best governance. The notions of violence and nonviolence got different explanations from Gandhi and Ambedkar. Ambedkar held absolute non-violence as an end and relative violence as a means, whereas Gandhi never made such a distinction and was an avowed opponent of violence of any kind. Ambedkar believed in purity of ends and justified meanses, just when the ends were just. Whereas in Gandhian perception, it was purity of means that determined the end. Gandhi and Ambedkar differed greatly in their views concerning mechanization of production and utilization of heavy machinery. Gandhi was apprehensive about the dehumanizing impact of mechanization and held it responsible for the creation as well as sustaining of exploitative socioeconomic orders in the world. Ambedkar, on the other hand, attributed the evil effect of machinery to wrong social organizations that gave sanctity to private property and the pursuit of personal gains. Ambedkar was of the firm belief that machinery and modern civilization were of benefit to all, and held that the slogan of a democratic society must machinery, and more machinery, civilization and more civilization. The idea of social transformation through democratic and peaceful means got support from Ambedkar as well as view it, would thus appear that Ambedkar and Gandhi had common allergy for social evil and imperial injustice. But a fundamental difference, more apparent than real, demarcated the two minds. Justice Krishna Iyer. 418. A Brief History of Modern India. Gandhi. They never sought a violent overthrow of any kind. Ambedkar desisted from pleading a blunt destruction of the social order. However, evil it was. And like Gandhi, he wanted to solve the problem of social disharmony and disintegration through peaceful rehabilitation of the oppressed classes. The target groups of Ambedkar and Gandhi were different, even though they converged at certain points. The methods and skills of communication and mobilization of both were different. Gandhi spoke in plain local vernacular, whereas Ambedkar spoke in English. To disobey the law to make the law more just was a Gandhian principle. Its outward manifestations were non-cooperation, hartal, satyagraha, and civil disobedience. Ambedkar was more inclined towards the observance of law and constitutionality in the political process. Gandhi viewed the untouchables as an integral part of the Hindu whole, whereas Ambedkar had an ambivalent stand in the issue. Ambedkar regarded the untouchables as a religious minority and not a part of the Hindu community, and preferred to call them a political minority or minority by force. To Gandhi, untouchability was one of the mana problems confronted by Indian society. To Ambedkar, untouchability was the major problem that captured his sole attention. Ambedkar made an exhaustive study of the problem from its historical angle, while Gandhi was more concerned with the problem in its contemporary situation. Ambedkar wanted to solve the problem of untouchability through laws and constitutional methods, whereas Gandhi treated untouchability as a moral stigma and wanted it to be erased by acts of atonement. Gandhi had little use of legal constitutional modes. He looked to morality and thus supported conscience to remedy the evil. Summary: Calcutta Congress Session, December 1928. 1-year ultimatum to government to accept Dominion status or else civil disobedience to be launched for completing dependence. CDM and Round Table Conferences, 419 Lahore Congress Session, December 1929. Congress adopted complete independence as its goal. Congress decided to launch a civil disobedience movement. January 26, 1930 was celebrated as the first Independence Day all over the country. Dandy March, March 12. April 6, 1930, led by Gandhi. Resulted in spread of salt satyagraha to Tamil Nadu, Malabar, Andhra, Assam, Bengal. Black Circle spread of the movement with additional avenues of protest. Kudai kidnappers, active in NWFP textile workers, active in Shalapur salt satyagraha in Darasana no Chowkidara, tax campaign in Bihar anti-Chowkidara and anti-union board tax in Bengal no tax movement, in Gujarat civil disobedience of forest laws in Maharashtra, Karnataka. And Central Province's agitation against Cunningham Circular, in Assam no rent campaign in up mass participation of women, students, some sections of Muslims, merchants and petty traders, tribals, workers, and peasants. Gandhi-Irwin Pact, March 1931. Congress agreed to attend second RTC and to withdraw CDM. Karachi Congress Session, March 1931. Endorsed Delhi Pact between Gandhi and Irwin. Passed resolutions on economic program and fundamental rights. The Round Table Conference, the second RTC right wing in Britain, against concessions to Indians. Session got deadlocked on question of safeguards to minorities. Black Circle, December 1931, April 1934. Second phase of Civil Disobedience Movement, Black Communal, Award, 1932. And Pune Pact provided separate electorates to depressed classes. Nationalists felt this to be a threat to national unity. Gandhi's fast unto death, September 1932, led to Pune Pact, which abandoned separate electorates for depressed classes in favor of increased reserved seats for them. Black Circle impact of Pune Pact on depressed classes, Black Circle joint electorate, and its impact on depressed classes, Black Circle differences and similarities between thoughts of Gandhi and Ambedkar.